Everyone, welcome to this video on lesson 1 of the Earth and Climate Scheme. So this one's on the Earth structure, and it also serves this lesson as an introduction to Earth science. And it's a bit of a funny one, Earth science. It kind of doesn't sit neatly within any of the three sciences, because really it's kind of a science in itself. Whether you look at geology or climate science, it doesn't neatly fit into the kind of usual three sciences of biology, chemistry, and physics that we give to students, which is a shame because it's really, really important, and it's something that students, in my experience, find really interesting. So the first few slides in the lesson resources are just a bit of an introduction to Earth science. I think it's worth taking the time to go through that. And the big idea that we want to get across in this scheme of work is well, we want to remind students what science is, or the scientific disciplines, what it is that they're doing. And they're trying to explain things that we can see all around us, in terms of things that we can't see. And a big part of that in the first set of lessons here is trying to understand the Earth's structure, something that we can't see, so what's going on inside the Earth. And we'll look at that in kind of an overview in this lesson, but we'll also look at the kind of plate tectonics and the rock cycle and the movements of those things happening inside the Earth in the first 8 lessons. And I suppose another thing that we can't see, and this is a really interesting point, and this relates to evolution and things like that as well. But we're also trying to see into the past and trying to get a picture of how the world looked and what was going on in the world in the past from the evidence that we have from rocks and geological formations and so on. So that's the first part, and then the second part will be about the carbon cycle, and that's also trying to understand things that we can see. So this is obviously a really big one at the moment, weather events and things like that, and trying to understand that in terms of global carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere and global warming and climate change and all of that stuff. So that will be in the second sequence of lessons. But in this lesson, we just want to introduce Earth science. Oh, and the last thing I should say, sorry, the difference between Earth science and geography. This is not a hard and fast distinction, but in general, the scientific part of looking at the Earth is to understand the processes by which these things happen. Whereas in general, and not always, sometimes in geography they look at processes as well, but in general, in geography, they're more interested in the impact of those geological or geographical processes on human beings. So it's a simple distinction. It's not perfect all the time, but in general, in science, we look at the processes. In geography, they look at the impact. And that's something important to stress to students, that we're not just covering the same stuff. We're looking at it from quite different perspectives. Anyway, that's an introduction. In terms of this lesson on Earth structure, after I'd gone through those slides, what I would do with students is show them how it is, in very simple terms, how it is that we are able to see inside the Earth. Now, we could just tell them this, but actually, what I kind of want them to see is what evidence we have to believe this is true. And again, the main thing is that they take away the basic structure, but it's I don't know, it's kind of nice to give them an idea of what's going on. So what I'm going to do is draw the Earth here, and I'm going to explain to them, and again, students find this stuff fascinating, because we're talking about earthquakes and seismology and all of that cool stuff. But I'm going to say, at some point on the Earth's surface, and I'm maybe going to illustrate this with a red pen, at some point on the Earth's surface, we get an earthquake. So I'm going to label my earthquake like this. And what we want to tell to students is that if an earthquake happens up here, well, all over the Earth, scientists have built detectors to detect the tremors from that earthquake in different places. So I'm going to draw a load of detectors like this, and you could, if you want, you could show them a map to show where we've got seismometers all over the Earth. You could introduce that word seismology as well. There's all sorts of things you could do, but we can say, okay, look, we've got these detectors all over the Earth, and there's even more than that. This is just a few of them. And what we want to explain to them is that when an earthquake happens and we get this kind of movement in the Earth's surface, there's two types of waves that are produced. So the ones that I've shown here, these squiggles, these are actually what we'd call the S waves. These are the transverse waves. And you also get some faster moving waves, which are longitudinal P waves like this. So it's a nice opportunity to just remind them of that difference between longitudinal and transverse. You may want to do that in a pre-req check just to check that they get that. Having said that, it's not mega important in this stage, although it is helpful obviously for them to revisit that. But what we get is waves being given out, energy being transferred by the movement of matter from this point, which we might call the epicenter of the earthquake here, like this. Now what we want to tell them is, okay, what is detected in these different parts? And what we find is, in all of the detectors kind of close to the earthquake, well, we detect both the longitudinal P waves and the transverse S waves. And you can say the P waves travel a bit faster. They get there first. The S waves take a bit longer to get there. So I'm going to do this on both sides. So here are my P waves arriving, here are my S waves arriving, here are my P waves, my S waves, P waves, and S waves like this. But then, weirdly, both P waves and S waves arrive at these ones, but then you get these two regions here and kind of here where nothing arrives whatsoever. So this is a bit strange, okay? There's literally no waves arrive to here. And then down here, you get a few of these where P waves arrive, but no S waves. So what we've got to work out as scientists is, well, what's going on here? Maybe I'll add some P waves and S waves arriving here. So what we can do first is label this. So this is called, maybe I would describe this whole thing. This is a shadow zone for S waves. So let's put S wave shadow zone. We call it a shadow zone. That's a region on the Earth where no S waves arrive after an earthquake. So this is our S wave shadow zone. And these two here, this one and this region here, these are P wave shadow zones. P wave shadow zone. I'll label those like this and explain to students what's going on. And this is where it gets difficult. We've then got to work out, well, okay, if this is what's happening, what is that telling us about the Earth's structure? Now, I'm going to guess that if you're teaching this to Year 8, you could ask them, you know, what inferences to make. And it would be a pretty spectacular Year 8 student who, you know, would be able to synthesize all of these different ideas around P waves and S waves and being longitudinal and transverse, traveling through liquids, traveling through solids, refraction. There's a lot going on here. So we're not expecting every single student to get this. But it's just a way of showing that this isn't something that's come from nowhere. This is something we've worked out from the available data. And again, what that's doing is not just transmitting the scientific knowledge, it's giving an indication, even if students don't quite get it, it's giving an indication of how we came to believe that. And what you can explain to students is, well, the theory that scientists have come up with is that actually somewhere in the middle of the Earth is what we call the Earth's core. And there's two sections to this core. So the first thing to say is some of this core, at least some of this core, especially around the outside, must be liquid. And that's why you get this big S-wave shadow zone, because the S waves can't come past the Earth's core. And again, my diagram might not quite work here, because maybe some of the S waves could have got past to that one. Yeah, it's not perfectly to scale, so maybe the core should be a bit bigger here. In fact, let's do it. Let's just make the core a bit bigger, like this. So what we've got is this core like this, where the S waves couldn't get past, and therefore some of this must be liquid. But then inside the core, and actually this wouldn't be to scale, so I'm going to rub this out. Let's do this properly. What we get is the fact that the P waves do arrive at some places suggests that actually inside here, some of that core is actually solid. And that's also that we've got evidence for this, not just from where they're detected, but when they're detected as well. And again, that's going a little bit beyond what we need to worry about here. But what we've got here is an inner core and an outer core. And then I can shade these in like this. And what I want to emphasize to students is that the inner core is solid. There's a solid inner core. And the outer core is liquid. Do something like this. So again, I'm not expecting every single student to get this. This is quite a hard topic. But the reason I think it's worth going through is that we don't just want to tell them, believe this, because we're your science teachers. We want to say there's been a process by which this picture has been created. Anyway, that leads us then to the main part of this lesson, or the main thing we want students to take away, which is, okay, what is the structure? So we can emphasize to them that this is the outer core. That's made of iron. It's liquid. And again, we can get a lot of this from the data, how fast it travels through, how much it's refracted by, and so on. We've kind of inferred all of this from the data that we've got. This is the inner core, which is solid. And this is kind of confusing because actually the inner core is hotter than the outer core, and yet it's still solid. That doesn't make any sense, even though the outer core is liquid. That's because the pressure is so big. It's forced into the solid state, even though it's at a very high temperature. So this is kind of crazy what's going on here, and this is a little bit beyond what we've taught them. But anyway, we can just kind of tell them that. Then the next two regions we can talk about. One is the mantle. Now this is a confusing one, as we'll see. This is a solid, and yet over very long periods of time it behaves like it's a liquid. So this is kind of strange, but anyway. That's really important. We're going to study that more in the next two lessons on plate tectonics and so on. And then you can say to them, the crust, which is what we think of as deep down in the earth, that's only the very outer layer, that rocky crust, that's the coolest layer, and it's also the thinnest. And I don't know if this is true, but I mean, the crust is sort of 20, 30, less than 100 kilometers thick, even at its very thickest, relative to the radius of the Earth, which is about 6,400 kilometers. So we're talking kind of 1% of the thickness. So it is kind of equivalent to like the skin of an apple, or certainly the skin of an orange, somewhere in between those two probably, around those fruits. The point being, the crust is super, super, super thin, and we want to emphasize that to students so that they take that message away. And that's basically it. We can talk through that. If you wish, you could label even more of it, but actually then part of that is we would like them to do that in the questions that we ask them later, and remember what we've told them. But yeah, that should suffice for an explanation. And then what you'll see in the slides is that students are asked lots of short questions to do on whiteboards, and then we give them a longer question to describe this structure in words. And you may wish to model that and show them how we do describing and how we link ideas together. Kind of describing, we're talking about how things relate to each other in time or space. So in this case, in space, so we're saying beneath the crust we have the mantle, beneath the mantle we have the outer core, and so on and so forth. So that is pretty much everything. The last thing that I've forgotten to say that we can just tell them, incidentally, the inner core and outer core are made of iron, and that is the reason the Earth has this magnetic field. So you could, if you wanted, sketch the magnetic field on here. Yeah, we could do something like this. So you could sketch that magnetic field. So the reason that the Earth has this magnetic field, and they may remember these sorts of diagrams from the previous unit on electromagnetism. But the reason is because that iron core at the center is acting as a giant bar magnet. So that's one more thing that you could tell them, and we could label that as the Earth's magnetic field. But that hopefully suffices, and in the next lesson we'll focus on what's going on at the crust and the mantle at that boundary.